When a cherished figure from the world of country music stepped onto a daytime talk show set, she expected the usual warm exchange about her latest album and upcoming tour. Instead, the atmosphere quickly shifted into something far more uncomfortable. What unfolded became one of the most startling moments in daytime television as a seasoned host attempted to corner the singer with political commentary and controversy, only to discover she had badly misjudged her guest. The encounter revealed how a respected artist calmly reclaimed control of the conversation and left the studio stunned by her composure and resolve. The morning had begun routinely at the studio. Reba McEntire arrived ahead of schedule, poised and professional as ever. Her iconic red hair was flawlessly arranged, and she wore a tailored navy blazer that reflected both confidence and authority. She had been invited to promote new music and share details about her tour, a familiar task she had handled countless times throughout her long and celebrated career. As she settled into her chair and adjusted her microphone, there was no indication that the discussion was about to veer sharply off course. Around her, crew members hurried through last-minute preparations, while the hosts exchanged casual greetings. Reba offered a friendly smile to everyone at the table. Whoopi Goldberg returned it with a reassuring nod. Reba had always enjoyed appearing on the show, appreciating its lively dialogue and receptive audience, yet something felt different that day. A faint tension lingered in the air, subtle but undeniable, though she could not quite pinpoint its source. As the show returned from commercial break and the theme music faded, Joy Behar introduced her guest with her usual sharp wit. She acknowledged Reba's legendary status and mentioned the upcoming tour, but quickly pivoted away from music. Instead, she steered the conversation toward political issues, framing them as concerns affecting working families across the country. Reba's expression shifted slightly, her surprise evident but controlled. This was not the conversation she had agreed to have. Reba responded politely, explaining that she was there to discuss her music and connect with the fans who had supported her for decades. Joy pressed forward regardless, emphasizing Reba's influence and public platform. She referenced Reba's fan base, characterizing it as predominantly conservative and rural, and implied that these supporters had consistently acted against their own interests. The audience reacted with visible discomfort, and even the other hosts seemed taken aback by the aggressive tone. Reba leaned back slightly, her posture firm and composed. Years spent performing on stage had sharpened her instincts, and she could sense the mood of the room changing. She addressed Joy calmly, pointing out that such generalizations about her audience were unfair. She described her fans as diverse individuals from many professions and backgrounds, people who worked hard, cared deeply about their families, and contributed to their communities. Joy interrupted again, asserting that many of these same people supported policies she believed harmed women, dismissed environmental concerns, and restricted rights. The studio grew quiet, the hum of cameras suddenly more noticeable. Reba's jaw tightened briefly, but her voice remained steady. She explained that political caricatures often replaced real understanding, and that the people who attended her concerts could not be reduced to simplistic labels. They were parents worried about their children, adults juggling multiple jobs, and young people trying to navigate an uncertain future. The host dismissed this response as evasive and shifted to another criticism, arguing that country music as a genre struggled with inclusion and diversity. She claimed the industry had a long history of sidelining artists of color and continued to fall short on representation. According to her, influential figures like Reba carried a responsibility to publicly challenge these systemic problems. For the first time, a flash of intensity crossed Reba's face, revealing the strength beneath her gracious exterior. She countered firmly, stating that such accusations ignored the genre's roots and history. Country music, she said, had always drawn from blues, gospel, and folk traditions, shaped by many cultures. She cited accomplished artists who had earned their success through talent and dedication, not symbolism, emphasizing that they were integral contributors rather than exceptions. Joy attempted to continue, referencing the past practices of the industry and its leadership. The exchange grew increasingly tense as it became clear that Reba was no longer willing to let sweeping claims go unchallenged. She maintained her composure, choosing her words carefully, grounding every response in respect for people rather than ideology. The balance of the conversation had shifted, and the host's confrontational approach was no longer dominating the moment. And to be completely honest, your lack of loud public commentary on social justice says more than you realize. When the Black Lives Matter movement was dominating headlines and social media feeds, your voice was noticeably absent. The atmosphere in the studio seemed to cool instantly, as if the air itself had shifted. Reba leaned in slightly, her tone still measured but now sharpened with an unmistakable edge that demanded attention. Silence. Joy. That tells me you have not been paying attention to my life, my work, or my values. For more than 4 decades, I have quietly supported charities, funded programs for disadvantaged kids, and worked behind the scenes to lift people up no matter where they come from. I do not believe every act of kindness needs to be posted online for applause or political leverage. Joy's expression tightened as she realized her usual pressure tactics were failing. There was a flicker of irritation, followed by defensiveness. She argued that charitable efforts were an easy shield, a way to avoid taking firm political positions. She insisted that fans had a right to know exactly where their favorite artists stood on issues that affected everyday life. Reba straightened, her voice gaining strength, her Oklahoma roots becoming more pronounced with every word. You keep telling me what my fans think, what they believe, and what you think they deserve. You speak for them as if they are incapable of forming their own views. Reba continued without pause, her gaze steady. You talk about these people constantly, but you do not actually know them. You do not sit at their kitchen tables or hear their worries firsthand. You do not spend time in their communities or listen to their stories. Instead, you lecture from a distance and assume that gives you moral authority. The other hosts glanced at one another, sensing the balance of power had shifted. This confrontation was no longer unfolding the way Joy had planned. Whoopi cleared her throat, clearly tempted to redirect the conversation, but Joy was already too invested to stop. She doubled down, asserting that she did not need to visit small towns to understand voting patterns. She declared that Reba's audience consistently supported leaders who weakened women's rights, damaged environmental protections, and stalled social progress. The refusal to openly condemn those choices, she said, amounted to active participation in harmful systems. That was the instant everything changed. Reba's posture shifted and the warm, accommodating guest disappeared. In her place stood a woman who had built a career through grit and resolve, someone who had survived an unforgiving industry by knowing when to draw a line. She set her coffee cup down with deliberate care. The soft clink against the table sliced through the tension and echoed across the silent studio. When she lifted her eyes again, the intensity in her stare caused everyone in the room to hold still. This was not the courteous performer who had walked onto the set earlier that day. This was someone fully prepared to defend her life's work, and the people who had stood by her for decades. In this, she spoke evenly, though the restraint barely concealed her anger. Complicity, she said, is sitting in a comfortable studio, earning a substantial salary, and passing judgment on people you have never met while claiming to represent working families. Complicity is assuming that anyone who does not mirror your exact political beliefs must be ignorant or morally corrupt. Joy tried to interrupt, but Reba raised her hand with quiet authority, stopping her cold. She stated plainly that Joy had already spoken at length, and now it was her turn. She explained that behind every label Joy casually used were real individuals with real lives. She described a woman in Tennessee, a single mother juggling 3 jobs, saving for months to take her daughter to a concert because music offered them a brief escape from constant stress. She spoke of a veteran in Iowa struggling with post-traumatic stress, finding comfort in songs that reminded him of home and stability. These were not abstract talking points or stereotypes, Reba emphasized. These were human beings facing genuine hardships, people who deserved dignity rather than ridicule. The audience sat motionless, many leaning forward, drawn into the raw intensity of the exchange. Even the camera crew appeared frozen, fully aware that they were capturing something unscripted and rare. Joy attempted to regain control, her voice no longer steady. She insisted that her criticism was not personal, that the larger political consequences could not be ignored. Her words faltered as Reba cut in, her response swift and precise. She spoke about the dangers of cultural elites dictating how entire regions should think and feel. She spoke about the harm caused by dismissing millions of people simply because they did not vote a certain way. Whoopi tried once more to step in, suggesting a pause, but Joy waved her off, her confidence visibly cracking. She claimed she wanted to hear how Reba justified staying publicly neutral when her influence could be used to guide people toward what she believed were essential social truths. Reba let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of humor. She addressed the word educate with clear disdain, pointing out that assuming people needed corrections simply because they disagreed was not education at all. It was coercion disguised as virtue. She added that it was deeply disrespectful to suggest that millions of Americans lacked the ability to think critically or act morally without being instructed. Joy pressed again, arguing that some matters transcended politics and existed in absolute moral terms. She cited human rights, equality, and basic decency as non-negotiable principles. Reba nodded slightly, acknowledging the sentiment, her expression unwavering, the tension unresolved, the room still holding its breath. Full. Reba nodded in agreement, and for a brief second Joy appeared relieved, as if she believed the tension had finally eased. Yes, they are moral imperatives, Reba said evenly, and that is precisely why it troubles me that you act as though morality belongs exclusively to you. You speak as if your perspective is the only righteous one. She continued without pause, shifting the focus back toward lived experience rather than ideology. She spoke about service in rural communities, about food banks far from major cities, about shelters and churches and volunteer centers that rarely make headlines. She described real physical work done quietly, without cameras or applause, and contrasted that with performative gestures that look impressive but rarely touch real lives. Joy's face flushed deeper with every sentence. She insisted that she supported many organizations and causes, pointing to donations and fundraising efforts. Reba cut in firmly, saying that writing checks from a luxury apartment was not the same as understanding daily struggle. She pointed out that Joy spent her days lecturing about what was wrong with the country while remaining insulated among people who shared her views. From that kind of bubble, Reba said, it was impossible to truly grasp what working families needed, because their reality had not been part of Joy's life for a very long time. The mood at the table shifted again. The other host sat stiffly, visibly uneasy. This exchange had moved far beyond spirited debate into something deeply personal and uncomfortable. Joy snapped back, saying she resented being portrayed as disconnected. She reminded everyone that she had grown up working class and understood hardship. Her voice cracked as she tried to reclaim moral ground. Reba answered calmly but decisively, stating that from her perspective, it looked like Joy had lost touch with those roots. She spoke of authenticity being traded for applause, and compassion replaced by easy political validation. She added that the woman who once understood struggle would likely be ashamed of what those values had become. The silence in the studio became almost oppressive. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed loud. Joy opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, visibly scrambling for footing. One for herself. Words failed her. Reba continued, her voice gaining steady momentum. She spoke about responsibility and how public platforms were used. She said that day after day, Joy came on air framing half the country as adversaries rather than fellow citizens. She described how political conversation had been turned into spectacle, into something violent and cruel, all while preaching unity and tolerance. Joy tried to interrupt, stammering that the show addressed serious topics and held people accountable. Reba responded sharply, stating that accountability and attack were not the same thing. Her words were precise and deliberate. True accountability, she said, required honest engagement with opposing views. What was happening instead was the destruction of character disguised as activism. She accused Joy of using outrage as a weapon, silencing anyone who refused to conform to a narrow worldview. Joy looked around the table, searching for support, but found only strained expressions and silence. Even those who usually stood beside her appeared stunned by how thoroughly her arguments had been dismantled. She weakly suggested that the conversation had gone off course and reminded everyone that the segment was meant to focus on music. Reba responded with a restrained smile that carried no warmth. She said that Joy had opened this path herself by choosing confrontation over conversation. She pointed out that assumptions had been made about her background, her genre, and her intelligence, all based on where she came from and the music she sang. Reba explained that those assumptions had led Joy to believe she would be an easy target for a familiar routine. She noted how dangerous assumptions could be, especially when proven wrong in front of a live audience. The crowd began to murmur, some nodding subtly in agreement. Joy could feel the control she had maintained for years slipping away. She accused Reba of twisting her words, insisting she had never labeled her an easy mark. Reba leaned back in her chair, completely composed now. She calmly listed what had happened since the segment began. She spoke of being talked down to, of her fans being caricatured, of her values being questioned, and of being forced to justify her existence to meet someone else's standards. She stated plainly that if that did not amount to being treated as an easy target, then the term had lost all meaning. Joy's hands trembled as she reached for her glass of water. The confidence that once defined her presence was visibly collapsing. The sharp-tongued host who had built a reputation on dismantling others now found herself exposed, struggling under the weight of her own tactics. Reba continued, but her tone shifted from anger to disappointment. She spoke about missed opportunity. She said there had been a chance that day for a meaningful exchange, a real conversation between people with different experiences and perspectives. Instead, that chance had been sacrificed for spectacle, for drama designed to boost ratings. Joy protested again, claiming she had only raised legitimate concerns. Her words sounded hollow, lacking conviction. Reba corrected her carefully, stating that what had been presented as questions were actually conclusions already drawn. Statements framed to appear curious while leaving no room for genuine dialogue. The studio remained frozen in that moment, the weight of the confrontation hanging thick in the air as the consequences of those choices became impossible to ignore. There is a clear distinction between asking someone for their perspective on social concerns and demanding that they defend why they associate with people you have already labeled as misguided. One approach invites conversation, while the other disguises an accusation as curiosity. The difference could not have been more apparent as the exchange continued. The remaining co-hosts sat frozen, watching in disbelief as their colleague was steadily unraveled by a guest she had plainly underestimated. The audience followed every word closely, many nodding in quiet agreement as Reba continued to articulate her point with calm precision. Joy made another strained effort to regain control, suggesting that it was understandable for the public to want clarity on where famous figures stand on major issues. Reba acknowledged that sentiment, her voice now tinged with something close to pity, rather than anger. She explained that curiosity was not the problem, but the way it was expressed mattered. From the opening remark, assumptions had been made about her character and about the people who supported her. The intention had never been to listen or learn, but to expose perceived shortcomings and confirm a preconceived narrative. Joy's face flushed unevenly, her breathing noticeably shallow. She insisted she valued a wide range of viewpoints. Reba responded with a quiet laugh that carried a sharp edge. In the span of a single segment, she pointed out, Joy had portrayed her fans as misguided, implied she enabled harmful systems, questioned the integrity of an entire music genre, and cast doubt on her personal morality. If that behavior was meant to demonstrate respect for differing perspectives, then the word had lost its meaning entirely. The audience was no longer merely listening. Low murmurs rippled through the studio, signaling that the mood had fully shifted. Joy sensed it instantly. The energy of the room was no longer on her side. She protested that her words were being twisted, claiming she never directly insulted Reba's fans. Reba calmly reached for her phone, glancing at it briefly, as though reviewing a record. She restated Joy's earlier phrasing almost verbatim, pointing out how clearly it framed those voters as acting against their own interests and supporting distorted values. The suggestion of replaying the footage caused visible panic to flash across Joy's face. Anyone? Joy scrambled to clarify, saying she had been speaking in broad terms about trends, not individuals. Reba stopped her firmly, not raising her voice but leaving no room for deflection. She urged her to stop backpedaling and take ownership of what had been said. Poof, what had been said. There was nothing cruel in her tone, only finality. The studio fell into a heavy silence. Joy sat stiffly, lips parted, her expression vacant. For perhaps the first time in her television career, words completely failed her. Reba filled the quiet, her voice steady and commanding. She spoke about what she believed had truly happened during the segment. She described how living within an echo chamber for too long dulled one's ability to think deeply or generously. Surrounded by constant affirmation, critical thinking atrophied and was replaced by reflexive judgment. Joy tried weakly to object, saying the assessment was unfair. Reba's eyebrows lifted slightly as she countered that fairness had been absent from the entire exchange. Condescension, assumptions, and rudeness had defined the conversation from the start. She explained that she had arrived as a guest, expecting mutual respect, yet had been treated like someone on trial in a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided. Whoopi attempted to interject, her voice strained with discomfort, but Reba gently raised her hand, signaling that this moment should be allowed to run its course. The audience, she implied, deserved to see the conclusion of something Joy herself had initiated. Joy looked around the table, searching for relief, but none came. The cameras remained fixed, the crowd attentive, her co-host silent. She made one last attempt to salvage the situation, stating weakly that her goal was simply to encourage people to think critically about issues that shaped their lives. Reba answered with a soft, saddened smile, explaining that critical thought did not mean guiding everyone toward a single approved conclusion. True critical thinking allowed room for disagreement among reasonable people examining the same facts. The fight had drained from her posture. The confidence that once filled the space around her had completely dissipated. Reba's voice shifted again, returning to the warmth and sincerity that had earned her admiration for decades. She spoke about respect, about recognizing shared humanity despite differing beliefs, and about the damage caused when disagreement was mistaken for malice or ignorance. The audience began to applaud, slowly at first, then with growing momentum. Joy remained still, staring down at her hands, visibly shaken. Reba mentioned that she had originally come to speak about music, about something meant to unite people rather than divide them. The applause continued as Joy finally looked up, her expression tight with embarrassment and frustration. She seemed to consider speaking, then thought better of it. The cameras lingered, capturing every second of her silence as the segment drew to a close. What viewers witnessed was a rare reversal. A figure known for dismantling others had been forced to confront the consequences of her own approach in real time. The image left behind was stark and unforgettable. One person sitting wordless while another stood composed and resolute, having reclaimed dignity through calm, clarity, and restraint.